So it looks like the person might not be able to make it. I'm very sorry. I messaged him 10 minutes ago, and it looks like he may not be able to make it. Prior engagements, I suppose. Yeah. Well, the start of this channel is going swimmingly. If you guys could not tell, it's going excellently. But yeah, well, welcome to Macabre Live. This is the new live streaming / gaming channel. I was going to start off with Elden Ring when it comes out in about a week. Oh my god, I can't wait. But yes, this is the new channel. Just because in the previous channel, the issue was sort of it was kind of getting messy. It was sort of, I had all the storytelling analysis, and then I had like the live streams, and people were like, "What's going on? Like, what's what channel? What kind of channel is this?" So yeah, so I decided to make the second channel. I tried Twitch. If you probably guys saw, I had some Twitch stuff on there. What's up, Harmonical? I tried out Twitch. It was fine. I liked it. Actually, I liked Twitch because it was the streaming was a bit simpler. But Twitch has a lot of like weird rules. Like, for example, I was planning on doing like, I'll stream on Twitch and then I'll also stream on YouTube. I'll stream it simultaneously. And you can do that but if you're an affiliate, you can't do that. They like don't let you. I don't know why. But yeah, and then someone even asked was like, why don't you start a new YouTube channel? And I was like, oh yeah, fuck, I should have done that, huh? So here we are, Macabre Live. But yeah, this will be like the gaming live streaming channel. Just so it was funny. I actually got a message from someone, a guy who managed a channel of 100,000 subscribers, and he messaged me. He didn't message me. He left a comment on one of the things. It's like, hey, just a heads up, I don't want because since your streams don't get as many views as like your film essays, I don't want it having a negative effect on your your streaming and whatnot or the algo and stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And so that's why I was like, oh, maybe I'll start streaming video games on Twitch. Then because if you didn't realize that the main channel, I actually privated all the oh no, sorry, I didn't private. I unlisted all like the live streaming stuff. You can still see it all in the playlist, so it's still available for everybody. But if you go to the channel, all the listed stuff, like all the stuff on the channel or in like the uploads, they're all just storytelling. So that way, now it's all sort of like the channel is coherent, media analysis, stuff like that, film essays, or just essays in general. And then this will be all the live streaming stuff, debates, discussions, gaming, etc., etc. Yes, so hang on one second. Let me see if he's able to come. For those joining, the person who I was gonna have on to debate trans rights, he is not able to make it. Learned that about 10 minutes ago. Let me know that he was not able to make it. Yeah. Hang on, let me message him, see. Yeah, I don't think he's gonna be coming. Well. Well, this started off well. And look, I made this whole like cute little GIF. Or GIF, I don't know. Is it GIF or GIF? I don't know. I say GIF. And look, see the coffee cups? It's like where I got the screenshot from the Irishman. This took me like 3 minutes to make. 3 whole minutes, Damn it. Yeah, I'm sure it would have been, Book. Would have been very interesting. Yeah, I ended up getting a lot of sort of some of the views. I think just in general we were going to discuss sort of, what exactly defines a man and a woman. Like obviously biologically we have male and female. Like we kind of understand. We have a much better grasp on that. Oh, thanks, Noggy. It's you spelled it out. Damn it. Fucking Noggy. I think, um, so like when we're talking about male and female, we're talking about, like actual biology. And that's pretty cut and dry for the most part. Like obviously there are certain, like Klinefelter syndrome, there are certain cases where, if like how do you define a woman? It's like, well, she has breasts and a vagina. It's like, well, what if a woman is like, has to have them removed for some reason? So there is flexibility there. However, when it comes to biologically, like actual sex, that's a lot more cut and dry. When we go into gender, that basically gets thrown completely out the window. In the past, we used to think gender and sex were basically the same thing. We used to use them interchangeably. And ironically, that's actually why we're having a lot of these issues. Like, so for example, the transgender people in sports issue. The reason that there's an issue right now is because in the past, so the reason that we separated male and females sports was because of biology. We didn't split it up because of gender. That wouldn't make any sense. Obviously, the reason that we split up male and female sports is because of biology, because of biological factors. Literally anyone, even those who are 100% against trans people in sports, they will completely agree with that. That is the reason we did it. However, because we call them men's and women's sports, gender, that's what causes the confusion. So for example, let's say when like sports were like invented, or when they were like split up into male and female, imagine instead of saying men's and women's sports, we called them biologically male and biologically female sports. Well, yeah, then that would be fine, because you can be a man or a woman who is biologically male, you can be a man or woman who is biologically female. So it's kind of silly that we have this like issue now because of sort of like a previous misunderstanding between gender and sex, and now it's sort of, we're kind of reaping what, I don't want to say reaping what we're sowing. We're facing the consequences of that. I think the definition of gender has more to do with philosophy than science. Absolutely, Mario. Obviously, there are aspects of biology that influence that influence gender. Like no one would deny that the vast majority of biological males identify as men. There's no one would deny that, and vice versa for women. No one would deny that. However, now as time is going on, as we are seeing sort of flexibility in how men and women act, whether they're biologically male or biologically female, this is where gender starts to sort of, this is where gender sort of gets, I kind of used the wrong term before I said throw out the window. I shouldn't say that. I should say it's like the ground on which we built the foundation of what we consider gender is now starting to sort of like soften. It's starting to sort of like crumble, in the sense of that foundation we used to build. Because again, our foundation was gender and sex are the same for the vast majority. That for the most part, that's what basically we thought and what we believed. Now, with trans people, it just, I mean, like there's always been trans people, but now that the conversation is becoming more open and more, conscientious of this, now we're starting to see, well, what exactly does it mean to be a man or a woman? We understand what it means to be a male or a female. So for example, here's a perfect example, because I was actually going to use this example tonight. Let's say that you're a teacher and you have a person in your class who they have long hair, feminine features, their face, they have breasts, everything about them physically, or from when you're looking at a person, is you would think that they are a woman or female. You find out about a week later that person, hey, actually that person was born biologically male, they have XY chromosomes. So in that case, when you're looking at that individual, would you now see them as a man? Well, no, because when you think about it, when we look at, if you were to show me a picture I would probably say, oh, that is a man or a woman. But I can't see their biology, right? I'm not looking at their their chromosomes. I can't see their chromosomes looking at a picture of them. So I am going off physical cues. Okay, well, nowadays there are people who they can pass for a different gender. So in that case, so what does that mean? So it's kind of frustrating because what ends up happening is you hear people who kind of argue against that say, oh, well, I can tell the difference between a man or a woman. Like how they dress, how they act, how they behave, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then you give them an example. It's like, hey, here's a trans woman who is completely passing. If you pass this person on the street, you would not assume they were a trans person. And then the person will default, oh, well, biology. Well, that's kind of bullshit because you're kind of flip-flopping. You're kind of flip-flopping between two positions in when it's convenient for you. First you say, you're just going off of how they look, how you're looking at them, their clothing, their body shape, their facial features, hair, et cetera, et cetera. But then when you kind of get thrown for a loop, or when you sort of like, hey, here's actually examples of people who you can't tell right away, or you would think they were the other gender, based on their outward appearance. It's like, oh yeah, but their biology. So that's sort of the issue. It kind of frustrates me when people do that, because you can kind of tell that there's sort of an ideological basis, or a sort of an ideological stubbornness there that they aren't allowed, that they aren't able to let go of. And they're kind of arguing, they're just kind of trying to, their actual worldview about gender and sex isn't actually very solidified. They're just kind of throwing a bunch of shit at the wall and hope it sticks. Whereas people who are kind of understand that, like, hey, gender and sex are not the same thing. Obviously, we are not exactly sure because there's so many variables when it comes to gender, sex, and how they intersect. It's such a complicated topic of discussion that, of course, there are no 100% hard answers. It's a very malleable conversation to have, and that's okay. That's good. We should have those conversations and discuss the gray areas and whatnot. But when you try to just hammer it down into like what makes a man or woman, well, it's hard because then if you can't give the answer, then they're like, oh, well, you don't know what you're talking about. And we should just default to how we used to do it, like back before we like even recognize trans people at all, which is stupid. That's not how science works. That's not how society progresses. You don't just say, hey, we're struggling, we're trying to figure this out, and it's too hard, it's too difficult, it's too confusing, let's just go back to how things used to be. No, we would never do that in any other circumstance. But let's see. Sorry, I know some of you guys asked some questions. Book, you said yours. Something I was thinking about a bit as we operate under gender as a social construct. To what extent would hormone replacement and surgery become obsolete? Precisely, Book. So imagine this. Because a lot of people, that's one of the questions you'll hear a lot from people who are discussing, trans issues. Why is it, if gender is a social construct, why is it that a trans woman will usually adopt the stereotypical traits of a stereotypical woman in our society? Well, the issue there, and this is like kind of what they don't understand, you can't separate a person's experience from the society they live in. So, for example, let's say you had a trans woman, someone who is a trans woman in our society. Let's say we rewind the clock and they were born on a desert island with a community on an island, and on that island, gender did not exist. They were just sort of like you're whatever. There's no male or female. They're just different, variations of the same gender. Would that person then adopt certain stereotypical feminine traits? Well, maybe. We're not exactly sure because we can't control for societal influence. It makes sense that if you are so let's say a trans woman, they're growing up as biologically a male, and they're looking around at the society that is telling them this is what a man looks like, this is what a woman looks like. If that trans woman feels like I am a woman, it makes sense that person will want to try and be accepted by that society that says, hey, a woman looks like this. Whether that is through the clothing they wear, how they style their hair, whatever, heels, whatever, and then eventually hormone replacement therapy, puberty blockers, etc., and eventually surgery if need be. However, I predict, and this is actually the irony. The irony of a lot of sort of like conservative positions around this is they're actually very against like puberty blockers and HRT and surgery, top or bottom surgery. The irony is that if our society became more egalitarian in terms of, or more malleable in terms of not setting very strict gender rolled guidelines, I predict we would actually see a significant drop in the use of puberty blockers, HRT, and top and bottom surgery. Because if you speak to trans people, you would say like, hey, why do you, what is one of the main reasons you want to go on puberty blockers or HRT? It's because, well, I'm in a society that is telling me my gender does not match up with my sex. Now, again, trans people do suffer from dysphoria. However, but then they go out into a society that sort of extrapolates that dysphoria, right? Because people don't really understand this. If you're a trans individual, everything reminds you of your dysphoric feelings. You go like imagine you kind of take it for granted. A trans person goes to the bathroom, and they're in a restaurant. They go to the bathroom and they're looking at the men's and women's sign, right? For the vast majority of people who are not trans, that is you don't even think about that. Oh, this is the men's room, that's the one I go in, that's the female, this is the woman, this is the one I go in. For a trans person, that little tiny interaction can cause a lot of anxiety. Because like, okay, well, which one do I go in? Do I go in but what if I go in and then people kind of like look at me and they kind of judge me? So it can be even something as simple as going into a public bathroom can be incredibly taxing on just on their personal well-being, on their mental state, which is something that cis people kind of take for granted, which, and it's not their fault, obviously. It's not, it's just not something you have to deal with. But when they don't recognize that is their experience, it's frustrating because they say, it's like, well, why do you feel the need to, dress a certain way or act a certain way or get, HRT? Well, because I'm living in a society that is telling me, hey, you might think you're a woman, but you don't look like a woman. How a woman's supposed to look. Even cis people deal with stuff like this. So, for example, if a biological woman, so like a cis woman, wants to dress up in stereotypical male clothing, like maybe she's a tomboy, she might face pressure by those around her to conform to, hey, that's not what girls wear, it's not what women wear. You should look more like a woman. Okay, so like any woman or any cis woman who has dealt with that knows what I'm talking about. Especially, actually, I should say, any cis man, probably even more so, because I think tomboys in general are a bit more flexible, just because the gendered the gender pressure for women isn't as much when it comes to sort of like, because like, I think like nowadays, and like maybe I am wrong, so you should let me know. I'm talking from like United States perspective. Nowadays, I think women have a bit more freedom in terms of dressing more traditionally feminine and masculine. They can kind of do both. Like, women can wear a tuxedo, a woman can wear a dress. With men, it's even more more restrictive in the sense of a man wears a tuxedo, like no problem, that's what a man's supposed to wear. Man wears a dress, it's seen as a lot more like taboo. I'm not to say it doesn't happen and people don't rock it, Harry Styles, Billy Porter, but it's going to draw a lot more ire. So you can imagine if you're a cis man, and let's say you want to go to school in like I mean, think about it. Even like cis men wearing a pink shirt can still be like, whoa, what are you doing, bro? Why are you wearing pink? Like thankfully, like for the most part nowadays, at least I would hope, that no one gives a shit. But like that's still sort of like a stereotypical thing. Like if you're a cis man and if you're a man and you wear pink, like what are you doing? That's not cool. Okay, so that's like a cis man's experience. And I know that most cis men can sort of relate to that. Hey, you like musicals? That's not what boys like. Now take a trans man's experience or a trans woman's experience and extrapolate that pressure by like 1,000. Because it's not just like that, those individual pressures about like, hey, you're a girl, you can't wear, baggy clothes or whatever. You're a guy, you can't wear pink. This is every single place they go. They go to there's a men's and women's section at the store telling them what clothes they're supposed to wear. And if they don't feel like wearing them, there's this dissonance between how they feel and what society is telling them to do. Yeah. And so of course over adolescence and into like their adult years, that of course would make any trans person be like, okay, well, in order to feel comfortable in this environment, I need to conform to some extent these gender roles. And sometimes they'll even go beyond. They'll try to do it. They'll try to push even more, Like there are a lot of trans women who will try to be very, very feminine, and trans men who are trying to be very, very masculine because they're trying to fit into the society that is telling them, hey, if you're a man, you have to be like this. Hey, if you're a woman, you have to be like this. Yeah, so it's really frustrating when people ask that, like, hey, why do if it's a social construct, why do they, conform to these? When it's the society that is putting that pressure on them, that sort of extrapolates or sort of like, amps up the pressure for them to conform to these certain gender roles. And so like sorry, I went on a rant there, but to your point, Book, as time goes on, I actually think the more we are flexible on gender, about like the more we let go of gender roles. And ironically, this is so funny because if conservatives really want to stop puberty blockers, HRT, and like top and bottom surgery, I think that the number one thing that will make that go down, rates of that go down, is if we start to see gender roles break up more. But they don't want that. They want their cake, and they want to have their cake and eat it too because they suck. Let's see. How do you feel about men and women who, with perverse feelings and thoughts of being the opposite sex, getting treatment and continuing to live their lives as the sex they were born with? What does perverse mean? What do you mean perverse feelings? That's a bit of a loaded term. I just need some clarification on that. Do you believe the word trap is a slur? I think it can't. It can be. It can be. I mean, I think often trap is usually used within the community themselves as sort of like, how like, I've met like, gay friends who use like the F slur sort of like, or like when women say bitch, it's not exactly the same. It depends on the context. I think it definitely can be. And I think it definitely can sort of like perpetuate this idea of, this sort of idea of like, oh, well, that's just a boy in a dress, not a trans person. But yeah, I think in most cases, specifically trap, it's not like something like tranny, that's, I think is far more loaded. That's far more used derogatorily. Trap, I think, is usually used more like I would never hear someone like say, hey, look at that fucking trap over there. Like, like people outside of the community don't really are familiar with that term. So it's usually used internally in the community as sort of like, in jest or irony. So yeah, it can be, but for the most part, I don't think it's used as such. Kind of like how bitch, like, like a person calling a woman a bitch can be derogatory, or it can be like, yo, it's my main bitch. Like, it can be actually very friendly. Another perfect example is like the N-word, how it can be both a horrible, horrible insult or like a very, a sincere, like, symbol of camaraderie between friends. Let's see. Something I always think about when someone goes, well, they look like a man, they completely leave out cis men and women who could be mistaken as the opposite gender. Exactly. And what's frustrating is what people will tell you, Book, is they'll say, oh, well, the vast majority of people, well, it doesn't matter about those people because the vast majority of people conform to these standards. Like you can, like, if I were, and this is true, if I were to go outside, 99% of people I see, I could guess based on their appearance. Probably 99% of the time, I would say, whether they identify as a man or a woman based on their appearance. And that would, on average, match up with their biological sex. However, that doesn't mean anything. When people use that excuse, well, there's like, trans people only make up XX amount of the population. Well, so what? A good example I use to sort of like point out the flaw in that logic is the vast majority of people on planet Earth are right-handed, and a smaller minority are left-handed. Would we ever say that left-hand people are less human than right-hand people? Of course not. Because we don't define human based on which hand is your dominant hand. That would be kind of silly. The vast majority of men are heterosexual. Any reasonable person would say, no, of course not. You can be a gay man and you're still a man. Doesn't make you any less of a man. Yeah. It's very frustrating when I see that. Uh-oh. Is the stream? Oh, no, the stream's fine. Sometimes the live stream in my studio gets fucked up. I know. Look at my cute little GIF, right? I can't. So, oh man, I can't use it. Well, it's kind of a nice little coffee cup. Oh, actually, hang on. Wait a minute. Wait, no. Ooh, wait. Yeah, cool. All right, cool. Now this works. I should have done that earlier. Yeah. So you would never say a gay man is less of a man than straight men because gay men make up less of the population. Of course not. So why is it that a man or woman who doesn't conform to traditional gender standards is less of a man or woman? It doesn't make any sense. They're just kind of, again, it's just sort of like a grasping at straws argument. When it comes to dating, should try transgender people. I don't know. Transgenders always sound weird, Jason. Transgender people. Should transgender people just straight up tell their date that they are transgender? Should that be a rule? What if said trans person refuses and would rather use their their quote unquote real gender? I think that is an incredibly difficult conversation. For the most part, I would say that if you're let's say you're a trans woman who passes, who passes to other people as you would be like a biological woman, you kind of have to use your best sense to sort of, yeah, damn right now. You see that shit? Bam. Yeah. Hang on. Should it be a rule? I think it's just a common courtesy in the sense of like, hey, if you are a passing trans woman, so if you are perceived as a woman if you are perceived as a biological female to others, you should, so let's say you go to a bar and like a guy's hitting on you, you should sort of be aware that like, hey, this guy might assume that I have a vagina, and that you should take. And so if he like asks you to go home with them, you should take that into account. I don't think starting off. I think that if you sort of like, I understand it. Obviously, like it's like, well, I like this guy, but if he finds out I have maybe a penis, he won't want to date me anymore. And I understand that. Like, and that sucks. That's heartbreaking. However, if you're trying to form a relationship, then you should just do it. You should always be upfront about it. I mean, that's even aside from the fact, people even say, just from a safety standpoint, there are people who, like you go home with someone and then they find out you have a penis and they might react badly. But even aside from that, when we're talking about like what should a trans person do in a situation, I think you should be upfront. As you would in any case, as you would with anything. Yeah. But yeah, it can be a very tricky situation. Again, I understand the pressure as to why. I understand why someone would not want to do that. I think it's best. I don't know if should it be a quote unquote rule. I don't know who would enforce that. But yeah, I would say if I was telling someone, yes, always communicate that. You always should. I think it's only fair to the other people. I think it's best for everybody. Yeah. And especially like nowadays where I think they're, I mean, obviously it depends on the situation. If we're in, say, like, if I'm in Boys Town in Chicago, there's probably a lot of like, there's a lot of people who are a bit more flexible. You should still communicate it, but you're probably gonna find a lot more people who are like, yeah, cool, I don't care, as opposed to like some like college bar. Um, let's see. Uh, Wait, hang on. Book and harmonica. What's going on? What about perverse? Wait, so harmonical. So when you say perverse, what do you like? What do you mean by that term? Yeah, because perverse can kind of is kind of a loaded term. Um, Hang on. Yeah, perverse, showing a deliberate and obstinate desire to behave in a way that is unreasonable or unacceptable. So that's why, or like there is a second definition contrary to the accepted or expected standards of practice. That's actually no, it never mind, because if you look at like the synonyms, they're like unreasonable, irrational, yeah, harmonical. I think perverse might just be the wrong word. It's sort of like a you're kind of front loading it as if it's like these thoughts are somehow bad. I don't think you meant to. Obviously, I don't think you meant to imply that. But the term I think is a bit more kind of comes off as a bit more antagonistic, if you will. Which is fine. Like like there are probably some things that I've said. Like you kind of heard me kind of stumbling over myself. This is totally fine. What's actually annoying is when people are trying to sort of like work this stuff out and discuss this stuff. They'll often take these sort of it's like, oh, if you're kind of tripping over your words, then you're not sure of this stuff, or it's like you're confused, and it's like it's not certain. It's like, well, yeah, we're trying to figure it out. These things are complicated. They're not super black and white. The people who want to think they're black and white, or who say they're black and white, they come off as a lot more sort of like sure of themselves, or a lot more like sort of like is a lot more savvy, because they're speaking in very elementary black and white terms. But if you're trying to discuss something that's very, very nuanced, obviously you're gonna have to, okay, let's think about that for a second. Let's see. And it's like, oh, you're gonna stumble over yourself, and you have to like kind of backtrack. It's like, oh, actually, let's do this. That's totally fine. If you only go off of, oh, well, this person stumbled over their words, or this person had to think about this. It's like, well, this is, yeah. Well, hang on, Harmonical. I don't think you were purposely being antagonistic, but perverse is a very sort of like antagonistic word. You're kind of front loading it. So I just wouldn't use that word. Because again, if you look at the definition of perverse, it's a desire to behave in a way that is unreasonable or unacceptable. Yeah. So it's not a big deal. I understand what you mean. Or I understand that you did not mean harm by that word. But yeah. But again, this is okay. If we don't want to just say it's like, oh, you used that word, you motherfucker, like you bad person. We don't want to do that. Where it's like, hey, it's okay. These things kind of take hard. These things take time to sort of flesh out and sort of like get. Because again, we were raised in a, for the most part. I mean, like this is very new. For one, I'm 29. I was raised in a society where up until like my 20s, I didn't even know what trans people were, like what even the concept was. So yeah, there's a lot of sort of like deprogramming, I guess, to kind of give you a different perspective. How come this video isn't on your main channel? So we want to so I'm gonna keep the main channel for sort of like just straight up video essays and writing stuff, and then this channel will be for gaming and debates and discussions, etc., etc., etc. If you go back to my channel, you'll see in my uploads all my previous stuff, like video game streams, debates, discussions, live streams. They're all unlisted now, so you'll only find my actual like essays. If you go to the playlist section and look under live streams, they're all still there. They're just unlisted. basically I'm just doing this so the main channel is more coherent. That way it's more, hey, this is a film and media analysis commentary channel, whereas this channel will be live streaming, video game, just fun, just kind of fun stuff. This way we can kind of do whatever we want with this channel. I can shit post, I can do whatever without it sort of like, without it sort of like interfering with like, because especially like, especially now that I'm kind of getting close to 100K for sponsorships, it's actually good because sponsorships, if they approach you and they're like, what is this channel even about, and me, I'm like, I don't know. So it's better to kind of keep it coherent. Whereas with this channel, we can just have some fun with it and do whatever we want. We don't have to worry about the algo and all that much. Yeah, I get you, Book. Yeah, Harmonical, I think the reason there was sort of like a little bit earth there, we were like, is because, like you yourself, you used the term perverse in a very, like in an innocent way. Like you didn't mean to use it in a derogatory or antagonistic way. However, there are many people who will sort of like sneak words in who are kind of like, oh, they're abnormal or they're perverse. They'll kind of sneak those words in. They'll say it in the same breath. It's like, I care about trans kids. I just want to help them with their perverse feelings. So they'll feign caring for trans kids, but then at the same time they'll kind of like do like a backhanded like, oh, but what they're feeling is perverse and wrong, and you shouldn't accept it. So and they'll do this very like trust me, a lot of people who do this, they know exactly what they're doing. Matt Walsh knows what he's doing. Ben Shapiro knows what he's doing. Even Jordan Peterson, I think, knows what he's doing a lot of the time. We know Harmonical. Don't worry about it. It sucks too because there are people who are bad actors like Matt Walsh, Ben Shapiro, who you can't trust what they say, because you know what they're saying is loaded. You know what they're saying is sort of in bad faith. So even if they say like, oh, I care about trans kids, I just want to like deny their existence and their feelings. I'm like, great. Oh yeah, Book, about Matt Walsh. You asked the Gender Unity Project. Yeah. So what is going on with that? So he basically tried the Gender Unity Project. He tried to trick a bunch of trans people into like speaking for a fake documentary so he could like take them out of context and make trans people look like bad. What a fucking psycho. Dude, Matt Walsh is oh my God. I saw him on he was on the Dr. Phil show. And it's so funny because he's the perfect example of someone who and it's funny because, there was that whole, Vosh, Noah Samson drama that happened recently. And one of the points they made, in that case, I actually am on Vosh's side. I'm actually someone who thinks, despite all the cons that sort of debate bro culture can have, I actually think it is a net benefit. Because as Vosh and others said, if you were on YouTube 4 or 5 years ago, you remember how fucking bad it got in the sense of SJW cringe, ha ha ha. And then the next video was Mile Yiannopoulos owns Black Lives Matter. And then the next video was Stefan Molyneux discusses the bell curve. And it's like, whoa, hold the fuck on. So you really, really needed someone who was on the other side, who's able to sort of engage in a very sort of, in a somewhat aggressive way. I think that is correct. However, one of the points that I do agree with is that sometimes people will take perceived authority over factual correctness. So, for example, Matt Walsh is a person who, when he was on the Dr. Phil show, he was spouting absolute nonsense. The stuff he was saying made absolutely no sense, but he was saying it in such a confident manner that people bought into it. It's like, oh, well, he sounds confident, he must be right. And it's like, no, if you actually listen to what he's saying, he's making he's just spouting nonsense. He doesn't understand trans people. He doesn't understand gender and sex. He'll contradict himself 3 times in a sentence, but he'll say it in a confident demeanor that no one will notice it. Shapiro does this. Peterson does this. All the like. And yeah, you have to be careful of that. You can't just go. You can't just go based off of perceived charisma or perceived confidence. You have to actually listen to what the person is saying. What was it? I think that was a line in The Big Short. People don't people are more people are more drawn to sort of like the perception of authority as opposed to like whether or not someone actually like knows like what they're talking about. Um, yeah, yeah, he's a terrible person, Matt Walsh. Do you believe dating people is straight, gay, or different sexuality? Well, it depends, right? So okay, so let's say I am a cis man. If I am dating a cis woman, so that would in that case I am straight. If I date a trans woman, she is a woman, so that would still make me straight, even if she had a penis or XY chromosomes. If I dated a trans man, who is a biological female, who is a who is a gendered male, that would be gay, I guess. But I mean, I think the problem with like that's sort of like what I was talking about before, Jorge. I think as time goes on, the concept of sexuality, like are you gay or straight or bi or pansexual or whatever, I think that's gonna people are just gonna stop caring, because like who cares? Like at this point, like for the most part, people are like they're kind of flexible. Most people don't give a shit. There are still some people who do and like latch onto it. But for the most part, it's like I don't know. Ironically, I think what's so insidious about sort of like harping on about sexuality in particular is because like let's say you're a guy and you're primarily straight, like you 99% of the time you're into chicks, and then there's like one guy who you're like, oh, he's kind of cute, I might tap that. For some guys that can like fuck with their mind. It doesn't matter if that same guy has fucked like 1,000 chicks. That one gay thought, like that one thought for a dude, will like fuck with them. Like, oh god, am I actually gay? Am I actually? Oh, what's happening? And so it's like, well, it doesn't really matter. Like, here's a good question. How do you define someone who's bi? So let's say, like, take someone like me who's like, I'm like 97% straight. Like when it comes to like who I'm attracted to, 9% of the time like women. But then there might be like a dude every now and then. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I feel that. So does that make me bi? Well, I mean, I guess. But like it in different degrees. It's not like it's like a 50-50 thing, or it's not like it's being bisexual you can sort of prefer one or the other. But at some point, if that is the case, then what does even like heterosexual mean? Like, is there a man out? Are there people out there who have never, ever, ever, ever had sexual thoughts about the opposite sex? Maybe. But like basically what I'm saying is like trying to define one's sexuality doesn't seem to have that much utility anymore. So yeah, I just don't see the utility of defining someone's sexuality. I just don't get it. Like I would rather everyone just be, hey, you're whatever sexual. You're whatever sexual. You're into what you're into. You're attracted to who you're attracted to. No one gives a shit. That is my dream world. And I think as time goes on, that will hopefully catch on. To your point, Book, what's actually ironic is that in the LGBT community, I think sometimes they can go in the opposite direction, where they sort of latch on to certain things, like, oh, I'm part of the bisexual tribe or the lesbian tribe, and it can get very tribal in that sense, which is understandable. I understand why they do that, in the sense of like these are often people who are sort of like ostracized from their communities. So when they find a community, they want to keep it intact. They want to feel a part of that community. However, I think in many cases that can actually lead to bad outcomes, because then you start to get tribal. It's like, hey, if you're a woman and you have a group of lesbian friends, and then all of a sudden you like, oh, that guy's actually kind of cute. Like, are your friends gonna be like, what are you doing? Are you a traitor? Like, are you betraying your roots? Et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, exactly, Book. So that's the thing, Book. As time goes on, if we're coming up with so many micro labels, like so many subcategories and so many like little nuances, eventually it's just going to get to the point where everyone's like, wait, why are we doing this? Who cares? Like, you can still have your labels, but for the most part, like, I think everything would be better if like no one gave a shit. And for the most part, I think nowadays I mean, I live in Chicago, so I think I'm a little bit biased. But like in Chicago, like no one gives a shit. Like you're like, hey, it's hot. Like, you're like, yeah, we it doesn't really matter. Like no one really latches on to that. Like a certain subsections of the community do, but for the most part, people are like, yeah, whatever, man. You want to suck a dick? You want to fuck a dude? Fuck a chick? Who cares? Dylan Burns calls himself queer because, in his opinion, LGBTQ is so broad. Yeah, kind of. That's kind of why I like queer, where it's like, well. Then the issue there is that queer kind of then protest, like it sort of sets up. Okay, so queer kind of inhabits people who are bi, pan, um, hetero, romantic, bisexual, like all different sorts. So what is not queer? Someone who is 100% heterosexual. Which again, are there people like that? I mean, I assume. Um, I can't imagine. It's hard for me to imagine. Like, okay, so you've never actually like had any thought ever about someone of the opposite, gender or sex, and yeah, maybe that's possible, but I don't know. I think it just because like so here's a perfect example. If we like so sexuality is based off of well actually sexuality is kind of strange too because is so if we look up the definition of heterosexual, sexually attracted to people of the opposite sex. Okay, so here's my question. So let's say we have a heterosexual man. He is 100% attracted to biological women. He meets a woman who is long hair, gorgeous, big boobs, nice ass, tight pussy, like everything's good. Then he finds out that that woman who he's looking at, who any person in the world would look at them and say that person, it's a woman, very stereotypical female look. Oh, this person actually has XY chromosomes. Does that then make that guy gay? Well, I mean, technically, because he is attracted to a a biological male, but if the only thing, but like he isn't attracted to that person because of their chromosomes, right? Um, yeah, it's just that's kind of what I mean. Where it's like, what's the utility of trying to? Oh, am I gay or am I straight? Am I head? Like, what is the utility of trying to label yourself? I don't know. Like for me, I don't know. I'm attracted to who I'm attracted to. I fuck who I fuck, and that's it. I don't concern myself with like labels in the sexuality department. Yeah, I think everything would be better if people started to let go of labels, and hopefully over time they will. Um, but yeah, yeah, and then like you get into the even deeper Klinefelter syndrome. There are many cases of like where chromosomes, or like Castor Semenya. Like for example, here let me look, just so I know what I'm talking about. Um, Castor Semenya is intersex. So okay, if I am attracted to Castor Semenya, what does that make me? Does that mean I'm bi? I don't like it. It just gets to the point where it's like, what are we doing? Yeah, exactly. Book. I think Castor Semenya is who we're talking about. She's intersex, and she's a she's a biological female, but she produces higher levels of testosterone, and so now she's being forced to sort of take certain supplements that try to lower her T level. But then it's like arbitrary because like okay, well, how low does it have to be to the average woman's? Like, well, I assume that the vast majority of like professional female sprinters, especially at that level, they probably have a higher testosterone like output than the average woman. That's why they are in this position, like female bodybuilders and lifters, like not as much as a male, but probably more than your average woman. So what do we have to bring her testosterone level down to make things fair? It's very arbitrary, and I really don't like it. I think it's kind of stupid. Um, But yeah, these are questions that we're trying to figure out and try to like work things out. It's like the entire thing with like trans people in sports. Like this is an issue we really have to talk about and work things out and try to figure things out. But then when you have people who kind of like barge in and are like, no, 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 you have to do this and this and this. It's annoying because you're trying to take this like very nuanced issue, and then someone comes in who only thinks in black and white terms, and like they're like the pigeon who knocks. Yeah, it's like you're trying to play a chess game, and then a pigeon comes in and knocks all the pieces off the board. Um, exactly, Book. Not to mention you had the Olympic swimmer whose body was perfectly designed for swimming. It would be ridiculous to physically inhibit him to make him more fair. Would we ever say that Usain Bolt, we should have him take certain chemicals that make him not as fast because he blows away the competition in the 200-meter race? Of course not. We would never say that. If he is the best based on the standards of the Olympics, even if he defeats everyone by 5 seconds, that's how it is. Even if no one beats his record in the next 100 years, 1,000 years, that's how it is. That's how it works. That's the entire point. So it's very, there's sort of like this, it's ironic too, because in sports, the entire point is like you're trying to find the best person at this particular event. So when you're trying to, oh, what if we can make it more equitable and fair to try and like get people closer? It's like, well, you're kind of defeating the entire purpose then, aren't you? Like there are plenty of like, so for example, is it fair that people who are like, over 6 foot, like let's say they're like people who are 6'5", have a natural advantage over people who are 5'5" in the sport of basketball? No, that person who is 5'5" might be a more skilled basketball player than the 6'5" person. But them being that tall, 6'5", is going to give them a natural advantage over that other person. Is that fair? Well, I don't. What do you mean fair? Like I don't know what do you mean by fair? That's the entire point. In certain sports, we understand that certain, like obviously in boxing or wrestling, we can't have a 150-pound person, wrestling a 300-pound person. We know we can't do that. That's why we have weight classes in MMA, boxing, et cetera, et cetera. But why don't we have height classes in basketball? Why don't we have a 5'5" to 5'8" league, a 5'9" to 6 foot league, a 6'1" to 6'4" league? Why don't we do that? It would make it more fair, right? Well, we just kind of say like, well, they're just certain things that aren't fair. If you're 5'5" and you're a really good basketball player, it's going to be a hell of a lot more harder for you to enter the NBA, if possible at all, over someone who is 6'5". That's just how it is, and we understand that. I suppose a lot of things are rooted in tradition. They are. And it's difficult to try to like. Tradition's a very powerful force. It can be very good. It can lead to a lot of good things. It can also lead to a lot of bad things. So that's sort of like why it's sort of silly when people say, is tradition good or bad? Like it completely depends on the context. Like what do you even mean by that? Like well, we have a tradition where the entire family gets together and we, just like share our experiences and help each other. Like that's a good tradition. If another family is like, we have a tradition where we go down to the playground and bully the ginger kids by throwing rocks at their heads. Like, okay, it's not a very good tradition. We should probably get rid of that one. I think labels are useful when it's just a description about yourself, not something to be lived up to. That's a good point, Caleb. If you like a label that kind of gives you a sense of identity, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But when it starts to sort of hinder your progression as a person, if I identify as a straight male and then I check out a dude's ass and all of a sudden I have like a breakdown, like, oh shit, am I not straight anymore? It's restricting me. It's causing me harm. So that label doesn't really help me. So in that case, again, it all comes down to utility. What is the utility of the label? If it helps you, good. If it hurts you, bad. And you should get rid of it. Yeah, he couldn't show up. I don't know if he said he had some prior engagements. I choose to believe him that he did, not that he just pussied out. But well, now you guys got to listen to me for an hour or another 5 minutes. We'll call it a short day. My girlfriend just got she got a coffee cart because she wants to like redecorate our apartment, and she's got it, and she's building it right now, and I don't know how well she's doing. I'm gonna go out, and it's gonna be like upside down. I'm like, babe, what are you doing? But yeah, I'll hang out for a few more minutes, and then we'll call it a day. But yeah, so yeah, this channel will just be sort of for like debating, discussion. If anyone ever wants to come on and chat about anything, just let me know. I'm always having people on, and this way we don't have to worry about the algorithm and stuff. I'll just worry about that on the main channel. This way we can do whatever we want, shit post, have fun, and just go from there. I ended up a bit in a sexuality crisis for a bit because I was constantly cycling through thoughts on whether or not I was straight, a lesbian, or ace. Yeah, exactly, Book. And then at the end of the day, it's like, well, what if you just embraced yourself by saying I'm attracted to, I'm whatever sexual. I'm attracted to whoever I'm attracted to. Like, cool, okay, now you shouldn't have any issues. Yeah, labels can be good, but they also can be very detrimental. Yeah, agreed, Harmonical. I think it's hopefully our people sort of like, the amount of stock they put into one's sexuality will eventually, teeter out. I don't think it's that big of a deal or very important. Opinion on the trans female MMA fighter who's fighting a biological woman. So that's another situation where I really don't have any idea. I mean, I have to. I should say, when I say I shouldn't have any idea, I know that it's not a good idea that if we have a person who is biologically male fighting someone who is biologically female without any sort of interference, whether it's like, testosterone blockers, et cetera, et cetera. I know that that's not good. I know that that is not a good idea. Like, if I say, hey, I identify as a woman, and then I go into an MMA fight with women, like that is not a good idea. That should not happen. However, most people don't say that. Even most people for trans people in sports are not saying, yeah, you should just totally let them fight without any sort of like, medical intervention or medication, et cetera, et cetera. The vast majority of people do agree that, like, obviously there is a very substantial difference between a biological male on average and a biological female on average when it comes to strength, physical ability, et cetera. So but on the other end, I don't like when people are just like, well, this should never happen ever. It's like, well, it depends. It depends on the sport. So for example, chess. Do we have to have, do we have to divvy up chess tournaments based on biological sex? No, of course not. What about badminton? What about volleyball? I'm like, well, maybe not, because there's not like actual physical altercations. What about boxing? What about MMA? It's like, oh, okay, well, now we're getting into the point where there's actual physical contact, so we'll have to see. So yeah, one, I don't like either extreme. Two, it depends on the sport. Three, when it comes to stuff like boxing or MMA or wrestling, stuff that like is directly involved with sort of like physical, altercations. In that case, I would have to look at the science in terms of the effects of, hormone therapy. Because like for people, like if you actually talk to someone who undergoes HRT, like if you have a trans woman, so a biological male who undergoes HRT, even if they have been training for like 10 years, that like the HRT will fuck them up. Like it like fucks their body up. Like it's a very drastic process. However, that person will probably still have some benefits, such as bone density, and they probably will retain, on average, more muscle mass than your average woman. So it really is more about, I really have to look at the science about that more to have like an informed opinion. Right now I'm skeptical. I'm like, when it comes to like very like combat intensive sports like boxing or wrestling or MMA, those are the sports where I'm like, there's been like a situation like I think swimming or cycling or certain stuff like that where like certain things have come up, but it hasn't been that big of a deal, because there's not like, it's not like physical altercations. But when it comes to actual physical altercation sports, that's when it can get very testy. I have to look more at the research when it comes to the effects of hormone treatment on someone's physical ability. As of right now, I would say I am leaning towards. There's always it's. I would say we're leaning towards there will always be a physical advantage no matter what. However, I need to get more well educated on it to make a formed opinion. Does MMA fighting take into account size difference? Yeah, there are weight classes. That's the whole reason they have them, because Conor McGregor isn't one of like the top MMA fighters. He's one of the best fighters. But if he's going up against a guy who's 208 pounds, like, it doesn't matter how good Conor is. This dude is over 100. This dude is 130 pounds heavier than him. All he has to do is kind of like run into Conor, and he'll like he'll hit the mat. Like, yeah. So yeah, sorry, Robbins. That was sort of like a long drawn answer. But again, I don't think that there are like having a black and white answer either way. I think is not very intellectual. I think it's, if you don't have a very nuanced opinion on it, or a very like unsure opinion on it, you probably are not as well educated on it. It's like the Dunning-Kruger effect, in the sense of, the stupidest people are the most sure of themselves and their opinions. There's pretty interesting this about talking with Hunter Avalone. Janae Marie Kroc had a pretty interesting insight about it in her talk with Hunter Avalone. Oh yeah, I'm glad Hunter Avalone kind of came on to the Jedi Order, not the Sith. Good for him. Well, thank you, Robbins. Good. Yeah, I'm like I said, like, it's sort of a thing where I'm like, yeah, actually, I don't know. I'm kind of torn between. But, people don't like that. People don't like when you're kind of like, hey, actually, like, let's look into this and, try and find out if it is possible. If it's not, if we do tons and tons of research and we find out that, like, hey, no matter what, there will always be a significant physical advantage for biological men over biological women, just no matter what, HRT, no matter what, at that point, I'd probably say it's like, yeah, actually, you know what? I don't think this is a good idea. I think we should try to find a different solution. Maybe a transgender league, something of that sort. It's unfortunate because this is never an issue with the other side. This is never an issue with trans men competing in biological female sports. We'll never have that issue. That'll never be a controversy, because a biological woman, even if they can take as much testosterone as they want, they probably will not be able to compete on any sort of competitive level with the upper echelon male athletes, because those men are, like, you think about it, like, in the whether it's the NBA, MMA, the Olympics, the men in those positions are the cream of the crop. They're like the top 1% of the top 1%. So even if a biological woman took testosterone as much as she could, she probably would still never be able to, like, match the level at which these, like, top tier men are competing. So it'll never be an issue. Like, no one, because again, it's not really about the principle. It's about win. It's like, who wins. If it did happen where, like, a trans man started, like, winning gold medals in the Olympics, it would be an issue. Like, people would be like, what the fuck? But because that's probably never going to happen, no one cares. But on the opposite side, well, that's kind of ironic too. Like, trans people have been competing in the Olympics for years, for a long time. It's only become an issue when they win, or when they, like, place, or when it's when they make it a big deal. If a trans woman comes in 10th at the Olympics, no one gives a shit. If they win gold, people give a shit. So it really isn't about quote unquote principle. It's more circumstantial, which kind of makes discussions a bit testy, I guess, because sometimes it's more about, it's very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's kind of rooted in emotion. People, it's like, yeah, I know this doesn't, like, it's not based on principle, but it doesn't feel right, which I understand. obviously, like, I understand it doesn't feel right. The question is, what do we do about it? But yeah, okay, yeah, I was gonna go an hour, hour and a half with the person who was gonna debate, but they were not able to make it, or they left, or they kind of tapped out, whatever. But yeah, maybe next time, if maybe I'll find someone else who wants to chat about this, because it's good. These are good ideas to sort of like work through and like discuss. Sometimes you need someone to kind of like back and forth with, to kind of untangle your ideas and what you think about certain topics. But yeah, well, thank you for joining me. Sort of a disappointing first stream on the channel, I'm sorry to say. But hope you all enjoyed. I will, but yeah, I'll see if other people want to chat about whatever. This channel is open, so I can just do whatever. I don't have to worry about upload schedule, etc., etc., etc. But yeah, I'm gonna stream Elden Ring when it releases on the 25th. That's in about a week from today. So if I don't have any chats before then, I will see you guys on the 25th. Thank you so much for joining me on the new channel. Make sure I assume if everyone subscribed to the main channel, but if you're not, go ahead and do that and subscribe to this channel as well. And I will see y'all next time.